Stop me in 15 minutes, okay? Shabbat Shalom. Take the Chumash, if you would, and open to page 411. 410, 411. 410 or 411, okay? Sometimes when I'm reading a novel, I get impatient. Long novel, I read slowly. I want to know how it's going to end. I want to make sure the hero makes it to the last. So I will open to the last page of a novel and read the last line. I'll give you the end. Ahab drowns, Moby Dick wins, but Ishmael survives. There, I gave away the end. Sometimes if I'm watching a movie, I watch the last moment of a movie. Luke Skywalker manages to destroy the Death Star and gets recognized. It turns out the princess is his sister. There, I gave it away. The last line. This is the last line of the Passover story. This is the last line of the whole drama of the Seder. This is the last line of the whole Pesach narrative. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. We escape from slavery. We cross the desert. We arrive at the Red Sea. Pharaoh changes his mind the 11th time. Pharaoh comes chasing us. And we are facing the sea ahead of us and Pharaoh's approaching army from behind. Moses opens the sea with his stick. We cross to the other side. The sea closes on top of Pharaoh. I'm giving away the end of the story. And when the Israelites reach the other side and Pharaoh's not chasing them anymore, they realize that they're free. They were slaves. Their parents were slaves. Their grandparents were slaves. They had no hope yesterday of being anything but slaves. They had no hope that their children would be anything but slaves. But all of a sudden, they're free. All of a sudden, they're free. And singing the song of freedom on the other side of the Red Sea, they stop for just a moment and they say, "What just happened? What just happened?" That's a remarkable question to ask. And it comes to us so rarely in life. What just happened? What just happened is a question that moves us from one level of history to another. My teacher, David Hartman, used to say that history has two levels. It's a two-story house. Downstairs history is all about the flow of events that come at us all the time. The things that we do, the things that we encounter, the things that happen to us. And it all seems so random. It just seems random. This happens, and this happens, and this happens. And it's hard to tell what's important and what's trivial. Is the flat tire that I had on the freeway trivial or important? Is the cancer that I just overcame trivial or important? Is my child growing up trivial or important? The child grows up and the child reaches 12th grade and the child leaves home and we have this whole family moment, but then 2 weeks later the kid comes back and says, "I'm moving back in the house." Don't do that, by the way. Your parents don't want you home anymore. You know when they say they love you and they want you home? It's a lie. Go to Michigan. Stay there. Is it trivial or is it important? From downstairs, it all seems so random. Every now and again, however, we stop and we climb to the next level. What just happened? And if we're really wise, standing on the second story, we can see the landscape. And we can see the pattern. And suddenly, upstairs history reveals the pattern. And I can see that the random events, the events that seem so trivial and so random, they actually have a pattern. They form a gestalt. They form a whole. And now I can understand where I am in the world. I can see the pattern. It only happens in retrospect. You can't see it while you're in it. It only happens when you can look back and see that's where I am. That's what just happened. I had a flat tire on the freeway, and I called the AAA, and they sent a tow truck, and the tow truck driver jumps off and starts fixing my tire, and the tow truck driver is humming Verde. And I say, "By your humming Verde, I love Verde." And the tow truck driver looks and says, "I love Verde too." And we embrace each other in our love for Verde. And I say, "Would you like to come with me Saturday night and go hear an opera? Verde's playing downtown." "I'd love to go." And a year later, you have 3 children and a house and a whole mortgage. And now you realize that had you stopped on the freeway 4 miles ahead. You never would have fallen in love with Verde. It all happens, it seems so random when it happened, but upstairs there seems to be a hole, a pattern. And now I can understand how my life is organized. And I can perceive the pattern. What happens at the end of the Passover narrative is that the people Israel, having suffered the bitterness, the bitter persecution of slavery, having experienced the remarkable and momentous moment of liberation, having realized that they're now free, they look back at their experience and they see the gestalt. They see the pattern. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. There is order to this history. It conforms to a pattern. There is a force behind it. They call that force Adonai. They call that force God. But what they're experiencing is a journey. That history is a journey from slavery to freedom. From the house of bondage to the promised land. From Mitzrayim, the place of death, to Eden, the place of nurturance and life. And that's what history is about. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed means I finally connect the dots. Remember those puzzles we did as kids? And you were presented with a page of random dots. And it just was dots on a page. It could have been just random. But as you start to connect them, you start to see a picture. And once you can connect the dots successfully, you see the picture. And then anytime you see those dots, you're going to see the picture. You can't help but see the picture. And what's amazing is you ever show that page to anybody else who never did the exercise of connecting the dots, all they see is random dots. But you say, look, can't you see the picture? They can't. You can. Because you took the time to experience this connecting of those dots, to connect them. That's upstairs history. What happens at the end of Passover, the purpose of Passover, the purpose of the whole Pesach experience is to renew our sense of the pattern in which we live. And understand that this pattern is relived generation to generation. 400 years after the Exodus, King David lives. And King David and his empire, the first Jewish empire, capitaled in Jerusalem. And a Jew says, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. This is the apotheosis, this is the climax of the process that begins in Exodus. And 400 years after that, we're in Babylon, exiled. The temple is destroyed. The priests are murdered. Jerusalem has become foreign to us. And Jews sitting by the waters of Babylon struggle to see where they are in the pattern. If history is a pattern of liberation, why am I in exile? But if it is a pattern of liberation, then I understand that my exile is temporary. I can have hope. I can have hope that this is not the permanent condition that abides humanity. I can be liberated again. There were Passover Seders in Auschwitz. Slave laborers to the Nazis would gather their rations and sit down late in the night out of the gaze of the guards and in the darkness of the barracks, and they gave a prayer to God, please forgive us for eating chometz on Pesach. But this is all we have to eat. And prisoners in the Auschwitz concentration camp recited the words of the Seder because even they could see that we are part of the pattern. And they could have hope that maybe we, like our ancestors, would be freed from slavery and given the chance to cross the Red Sea and see the pattern and celebrate the pattern of history. That's the purpose of the Passover holiday. It's to renew the sense that we live in a history that has an order, in a history that moves us from slavery to liberation, from death back to life, from the chaos, the historical, moral chaos of Mitzrayim to a morally ordered world that is rational and where people have place. And the purpose of Passover is to change our vision of ourselves in the world, the way we see ourselves, so that we have this vision, this perception of ourselves as part of this pattern. But we are not passive. This is the second meaning of the Passover. The second meaning is not just that we're part of this pattern, but we are the shapers of this pattern. So now, if you would, turn to page 468. Turn to page 468. Because when we come out of Egypt, according to the Torah's story, we come to Mount Sinai. And what does God offer at Mount Sinai? You are part of a pattern that moves the world from slavery to freedom, part of a pattern in history that moves from bondage to liberation, part of a pattern that moves from death to life, but you are an active agent of that process. You may not sit passively by the side of the sea and wait for it to split. You better jump in the water or else it ain't going to split. You are part of the pattern. And part of that pattern isn't just seeing yourself in a certain place in history. It's the way you see the other. What did you learn from the experience of Egypt? Not just that you're part of the pattern. That's the macro. What did you learn on the micro level? You were a slave. What is the worst part of being a slave? The labor, the oppression, the dehumanization, being stripped of all dignity. The worst part of being a slave is that a slave is invisible. The slave is socially invisible. You don't exist in the mind of the master. You're expendable. You're replaceable. You're just a quantity of labor embodied in a body. We could find another one. You're expendable and replaceable. Remember, I love movies. Remember the movie The Help? Did anybody see this movie, The Help? Came out around 4 or 5 years ago. Remember the movie? It's about African-American maids, African-American housekeepers in the American South in the 1960s, just at the dawn of the Civil Rights Movement. Remember the story? The story is the kid, Emma Stone, comes home from college, and she discovers that the family fired the maid. And who was the maid? The maid was this African-American woman who lived with the family since the day she was born. The maid was the woman who raised her, who cooked her meals, who cuddled her when she was sick, who took care of her when she was growing up, who sewed her clothes, who made her bed, who made a life. And the maid was the woman who nurtured her, and she came home from college expecting to find the maid because the maid was to her such an important person. But in the economy of the family, the maid was expendable. The parents say to her, "Why are you so upset? She was just the maid. You went away to college, we didn't need her, so we fired her." And she goes nuts. Remember the story? She goes nuts. Because, what do you mean she's just the maid? She's the woman who raised me. The family can't see her. She's invisible. The family can't see her. She doesn't exist. The family can't see her. She's replaceable. She's expendable. She's superfluous. You remember that, because that's who we were in Egypt. So the Torah teaches this ethic. It's on page 468 on verse 20. Ready? Right? You will not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were stranger in the land of Egypt. You will not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I'll heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I'll put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans. That's an angry God. You will not ill-treat any widow or orphan. You will not ill-treat a stranger. Now, what stranger, widow, orphan, what do they have in common? What characterizes that class of people? Stranger, widow, orphan. This is the audience participation part of our sermon. Vulnerability. Why are they vulnerable? The stranger is the illegal alien, right? She's the one who came from Guatemala to make your beds and clean your toilets and paint and fix your roof and clean your house. She has no legal rights in your country. If she's cheated, she can't ask for redress of grievance because you'll just call the INS, send her home. The widow, the orphan, has no one to protect them, no one to provide for them. They are vulnerable. You can cheat them and get away with it. You can cheat them and get away with it, but you must not do that, says Torah. Now, why? Why must you not do that? It would be easy for Torah to say because it's wrong, it's ethically cruel. Or it would be easy for Torah to say because that's not the kind of people we are, but it's deeper than that. Because you know what's right and sometimes we do what's wrong. Because we know what our duty is and sometimes we turn the other way. So the Torah roots this ethic in something much more visceral. Much more powerful, much more emotional. Why must you not cheat that person? Because you were that person. And because every Seder, when you say, I am going back to Egypt this year, tasting the bitterness of slavery, you are that person. This is called an ethic of empathy. Because you remember and you have experienced social invisibility, you're not permitted to render anyone in your society socially invisible. I told this story now 3 times today, so I'm going to tell it one more time. But those of you who have heard it, I apologize. There's a member of our shul who has a Spanish-speaking housekeeper. Imagine that. And she came to see me with her Spanish-speaking housekeeper. I speak a little Spanish. So Rosa came from El Salvador 10 years ago to work in this family's home. And so Rosa tells me this story. She has a friend, let's call her Maria, who just came from El Salvador recently to work in a Jewish family's home. And Maria's been working in this home for weeks now, 6, 7 weeks, and hasn't gotten paid. The reason she came was to send money home to her children, because she can make so much more here than she can make at home. And her mother is raising the children back in Salvador, and she needs to send the money home, but she asks and she asks and she asks, and the family won't give her the money. Jewish family. And Rosa looks at me and she says, Rabbi, El Rabino, Señor Rabino, these people, es Hebreos. These are Hebreos. And she tells me, I've lived 10 years now in a Jewish home. 10 years I live with Hebreos. Hebreos don't do this. Hebreos aren't this kind of people. Hebreos don't do this. Hebreos tienen corazón. Hebreos have heart. They have heart. They don't do this. And she looks at me and she says, don't they know that they are Hebreos? Don't they know that they don't do this? Rabbeinu, don't they know that they're here? And I'm so embarrassed. I'm sitting in front of this lady from Salvador, and I'm embarrassed. I picked up the phone. I actually called the guy. You know, if you have rabbi in your name, you can get through secretaries really quick. And I got hold of the guy in his office, and I said, look, I know you made a terrible mistake, but there's someone working for you that hasn't gotten paid recently, and we need to get her paid. Oh, Rabbi, I'm so sorry. It was an oversight. Of course it was, obviously. Just take care of it, huh? She got paid. She left that family. She works for a different family today. What does Rosa know that too many of us don't know? Hebreos don't do this to people because we were slaves in Egypt, because we were penniless immigrants to this country, because we worked and scratched a living out of this country. Hebreos aren't like this. There is a pattern to history, says Exodus, that moves us from slavery to freedom, from degradation to dignity, from the pain of Egypt to the celebration of life of Eden. And you are an agent of that pattern. It is your job in the world not simply to see the pattern and celebrate the pattern, although that's part of Pesach too. That's what Dayenu is all about. It is a part of Pesach to teach this to children so that they understand that they are agents of this process. And that's why we must start with the bitterness of slavery and end with the sweetness of liberation, so that every child at the table understands that this is who we are. And this is the way that we organize life. We are a people possessed of remarkable eyes. Jewishness, I want to tell you, is not in the heart, and it's certainly not in the belly. It's in the eyes. It's that I can see myself as part of a divine pattern of history that moves toward the liberation of humanity. I can see myself as an agent in that pattern. And every stranger that comes across, I can see them. And I'm not permitted to take them for granted. I'm not permitted to render them invisible. And that this is the teaching of Pesach. Ilu hotzianu me Mitzrayim dayenu. You ever read that prayer? Anybody ever read it? It's a silly prayer. It has silly lines in it. If you had taken us out of Egypt and not crossed the Red Sea, Dayenu. I don't know about you, but that's not Dayenu for me. That wouldn't have worked, right? And if you'd crossed the Red Sea and not brought us to Mount Sinai, Dayenu. And the funniest one I love is, if you'd brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah. I can imagine Jews waiting there going, okay, what's supposed to happen, you know? Like, we're here. But what is that song about? Every step now matters because I can see the bigger pattern from upstairs. And I can see that every step in my life, at every moment of my life, that every encounter in my life is not random and not insignificant and not unnoticed because I'm part of this larger journey from slavery to freedom, from Egypt to Eden, from the place of constriction and death to the place of openness and life, and that I have a role in that drama. It's not Dayenu, because tomorrow we go back to work to bring the world forward. I wish everyone a happy, healthy Pesach.